Hi, everybody. So this week, week number 7, we are looking at sampling, estimating the frequency of behaviors and beliefs. We'll talk a little bit about generalizability, the difference between populations and samples. We'll look at some different types of sampling, when a sample is biased, maintaining or obtaining a representative sample, settling for an unrepresentative one, and then a little bit about interrogating external validity. So a lot of things related to external validity here. And if you remember back, a big part of external validity is, can we generalize the results? Do they represent the entire population? And so generalizability plays a really big role in our sample selection process. This is external validity that we're looking at. If you read something that says 3 in 4 women worldwide rate their lives as struggling or suffering, what women did they interview? What women did they sample, right? We got to look at the sample and the population. Like we were saying, worldwide, did they actually get people from around the world? Did they get people of different backgrounds? How were the people selected? These are all questions that we have to ask in order to determine if the sample represents the population at large. I love this, right? Like picking people randomly, or like I have a positive result, I can make a conclusion, sample size 1, right? And we often make conclusions from our own experiences, but if we want it to represent everyone, it's really important that we choose a good sample and we make sure that it's fair and random. So that's kind of what we'll focus on here. What is the difference between a population and a sample? The population is the entire set of all people or things in which you are interested, right? So it's the entire population. So let's say I wanted to know about students at Moore Park College. Okay, population would be every student who currently goes to Moore Park College. It could even include every student who has attended Moore Park College or is registered to attend in the future, depending on how I define that. So it's the entire set of everyone or everything in which you are interested. It could be everyone who identifies as a woman in the world, everyone who goes to Moore Park College, right? It's the entire group of people you're interested in. Now, when you're doing research, you don't actually have to ask the entire population in order to make a conclusion. And actually, to be honest, it's not even possible to ask everyone most of the time. Even getting everyone in one class might be impossible to do if one person never responds or shows up. So, in order to count for that or counter for that, what we do is we take a sample. A sample is a smaller set of the people or things taken from the population. So, if I'm interested in all Moorpark College students, what I could do is take maybe like 1,000 students who go to Moorpark or 500 students who go to Moorpark. As long as I pick that sample properly, which we'll talk more about in a moment. If I was interested in all women, right, in the world, then I would want to take women from a bunch of different countries, different ages, but I could select maybe like 1,000 or 5,000 women instead of asking every single woman in the world. So a sample is like a small little group of the people in the population. Think about it as like a sample with food. Everything's food with me, right? So a sample is like a little taste of the entire thing that you are interested in. If you were to take a census, it is every member, right? Every person in the world who identifies as a woman. And it's not typically possible to get a census. It might be with a smaller group or depending on like the group of people that you're studying. But typically, because a census is impossible, we settle for a sample. Now, so coming from a population to generalizing to that population, in order to make an inference or like some kind of like generalization from a sample to a population, we really have to think about how the sample was selected. We want it to be a representative sample, an unbiased sample, where all members of that population had an equal chance or equal probability of being included. We don't want a biased sample or an unrepresentative sample where not all members had an equal probability, right? So we have down here like a biased sampling technique would be recruiting people sitting in the front row. An unbiased one would be obtaining a list of all registered Texas Democrats from public records and calling a sample of them through a randomized digit calling. So maybe if I wanted Moorpark College students, I get a list of all the Moorpark student numbers and I randomly pick ones from it, right? I generate on a list like 1,000 of them or 500 of them. So ideally, what we want is an unbiased representative sample where everyone has an equal probability. That is going to give us the best chance to make inferences and generalize to the population. There are a lot of ways to get a very biased sample. Unfortunately, not all research does things in a very non-biased, representative sort of way. So some of the ways to get a biased sample, one of them is convenience sampling. You sample people who are easy to contact, right? Like I sample the students who always come to class, or I sample the students that pass by me at 10 o'clock when I'm standing on Raider Walk, right? So a convenience sample is when you sample those that are easy, right? You take something that is convenient, like on the last slide, right? Recruiting the people sitting in the front row. That would be a biased, unrepresentative sample. Another way to get a biased sample is self-selection. You only sample those who volunteer, right? So if you're trying to conduct research and you only sample people who volunteer, there might be a bias there of people who volunteer. They might be more passionate about that topic. They might have a more polarized opinion about that issue, right? So even if you had like a massive amount of people who respond on something like children in like rear-facing car seats and rage and aggression on the road, even if you have a ridiculous number of people, if it was biased and only people who volunteered, your results aren't random, and so they might not be representative of or generalized to the public. So one of the ways that we like to obtain a representative sample is through what's called probability sampling or random sampling, kind of like the gold standard, right? Probability or random sampling. Every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So everything is just random. Again, if it was the college, right, like I pick every 10th person that's registered in like the college, right? Or I pick random numbers like through a computer program, and everybody has a random chance or an equal chance of being included in that population. Some ways that we can do this, there's simple random sampling where you assign a number to each member of the population, and then you use a table of random numbers to select the sample, right? With all the wonderful computer generated things that we have, this is a very easy way to do this. Everyone gets a number, you pick a bunch of numbers at random through a computer program, and it's a simple random sample. Everybody had an equal chance because of those random numbers. Another way that we might do this is called cluster sampling, where clusters or groups of participants within a population are randomly selected, and then all individuals in each selected cluster are used. So for example, if our population of interest is California community college students, and we have 114 colleges, we randomly select 50 of them, and of the 50, we use all of those students. So you're kind of picking little clusters within the population and then using everybody within the cluster. And which one of these methods you use is going to be dependent on what is available to you, what your resources are, and what your goals are for your research. Another thing we can try to do is multi-stage sampling, where you have two random samples that are collected. Stage one, you have a random sample of clusters selected from the population of interest. And then stage two, from those clusters, a random sample of people is chosen. So let's say again, all community college students is our population of interest. So from 114 colleges, we randomly select 50. And of those 50 colleges, we take 200 students from each. This might be another way to do this within our college if we wanted to take like the clusters could be the majors, and then within each major, we take a certain number of people. So it's multi-stage because you're dividing it up into a couple of different elements and these clusters to get then a random sample of people. Another thing you can do is a stratified random sample, where the researcher selects specific demographic categories, such as like ethnicity or gender or age or whatever it might be, and then you randomly select individuals from each of the categories. So again, back to that example, if we are interested in all community college students, but now we're looking at first-time students specifically. That's kind of our demographic category that we're interested in. We know the proportion of ages, which is over here on the right. In the sample of 1,000 students, we at least 60 that are 50 plus, right? So we still select this at random, but we have like a little stratified specific demographic category that we're looking for, right? So this is just another way that we can still stay within the representative sample area, but get something a little bit more specific, a little more narrow to the demographic category that we are interested in studying. So some other things that we can see, oversampling, a variation of stratified random sampling in which a researcher overrepresents one or more groups. So again, a population of California Community College first-time students, we know all the proportion of ages as we saw on the last slide. In a sample of 1,000, we include at least 100 plus students. So it's still random, but then what we're doing is we're oversampling to make sure that we have enough information. And then we're going to adjust the final results so that oversampled group is weighted to the actual like portion or population that we're interested in. So just another way of adjusting, given that maybe we're interested in a specific minority, we overgather and then we adjust and weight in order to make sure that we are still representative. Another thing we can see here is systematic sampling. Use a random number table, select two numbers like 5 and 3, for example. Start with the fifth person and then choose every third person until the sample reaches the desired size. So many choices of things that we can do depending again on the population and what it is that we're looking at, what it is that we want to know. Really common in general to kind of combine techniques, right? Like as you can see, there's a lot of different ways of getting a random sample. So you can combine techniques whenever like appropriate or needed. To control for bias, you might use things like weighting, right? Kind of weighting specific groups in order to counter for what you have. And each technique, though, that we're talking about has some element of randomness to it. Everybody has that equal chance of being selected. And that's really what is the key to avoiding bias, right? Avoiding the inability to generalize because we have a biased group. One key difference, I hear this sometimes like random sampling versus random assignment. A little bit different things, right? So random sampling is what we've been talking about. It increases external validity, right? Because you are gathering in a random way. Random assignment is typically something that we do to increase internal validity, how the experiment was set up. So once we have an experiment, because we have our groups and our samples selected, random assignment refers to the use of chance procedures to ensure that each participant has the same opportunity to be assigned to any given group within the study. Study participants are randomly assigned to different groups, such as the control group versus the treatment group, and this again increases internal validity. So we want to start with like making sure we have a really good sample. And then once we go to do our research and we actually go to conduct our experiment, we then add on top of it this idea of random assignment in order to keep increasing our likelihood of everything being valid. And in this case, looking at internal validity. Sometimes we have to settle for an unrepresentative sample. It's not ideal, but there are times where non-probability sampling techniques are kind of all that we have access to. And it might be biased and it might not give us as great of information, but there are times where this might be difficult to avoid. And again, it's not ideal, but there might be times where there's no other option. So we might have to give in to convenience sampling, which we talked about earlier, just whoever you can get. Purposive sampling, let's say we want to study certain kinds of people. So you only recruit those participants like in a non-random way. Like for example, let's say you put up a flyer trying to recruit people who have Alzheimer's at a clinic, right? So randomly, rather than randomly calling like a bunch of people who go to the clinic, you put out a flyer and you're actively seeking people with a purpose, hence the name. And that might be the only way that you can actually get enough participants that meet the demographic you're interested in. Another one is called snowball sampling. Participants are asked to recommend others for the study, and this might be in rare cases. So let's say you put up that flyer looking for people with Alzheimer's, and then you ask those people to help you find other people who have Alzheimer's, right? So you're kind of snowballing off of that person to get more participants. It also might be that you do what's called quota sampling, where you identify a target number and then fill it like non-randomly. You're just trying to get to a certain quota or certain number. And again, while these might not be ideal, there are times where non-random samples might be the only option that are available to you. So when we are interrogating external validity and looking at generalizability, what is it that matters most? Is it bigger or better? And in general, large samples aren't necessarily more representative than smaller ones. Bigger does not always equal better. That sampling technique is much more important than the sample size. Now, the size does matter, right? There are formulas that we can use to calculate how many people you need in order to have enough statistical power to make a conclusion, right? Which you probably learned a little bit about in your statistics class. But in general, we're more concerned with how you got the sample than how many people you got. I always think of Kinsey with this, right? Kinsey was a very famous researcher who studied human sexuality, and his samples were massive, right? He got tons and tons of people from his classes that he was teaching at the time. But it wasn't a random sample, it was a sample of convenience. And so it's a really big limitation to his findings and his research because it wasn't done in a sound statistical, like random sort of way. So again, bigger isn't always better. We'd rather it be random and representative than massive. So that is it for week number 7 on sampling. Make sure that you do all of the assigned reading. Make sure you watch the lecture video that I put together for you. Combination of all this together will hopefully help you to understand all of the materials. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all next week.